Hey CodeCrew, in this video you're going to continue building the iOS Notes app by implementing the ability to add, update, edit, and remove notes. If you haven't seen the earlier lessons, I'll link to the playlist below and also on a card on the screen. Alright Ali, over to you.
Alright, now what we're going to do is we're going to add a function that allows us to add a note to our database. And using LMOfire is super easy. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a new function after fetch notes. And we can call it add note. And this function will take in a date, which is a string, a title, which is a string, and a note, which is a string. And now what we're going to do is we're going to write LMOfire af dot we're going to af dot request, and we're going to add our URL, which is the same thing as the fetch route, but we're just going to change the fetch to a create. And then we're going to write a comma after the string, and then we're going to write method is equal to post dot post. So that tells it it's a post request. And the encoding URL encoding dot http body. And now we can send in the headers. So the header will be an array, and it's going to have a title, and the title will be the title we pass in, and it's also going to have a date, which is the date we pass in, and it's going to have a note, which is the note we pass in, like that. And then we can write dot response JSON, and then we can put 2 curly brackets around that and just write response in, like that. So that should be enough, and we should be able to actually send a note to the server. And the headers are the exact same headers we used in Postman when we added the headers for title, date, and note, and we passed in these values. Now it's the same thing, but we're just passing in the value the user writes. So what I do now is if I go into my view controller, if I go into my storyboard, I see that I need a view controller for this screen, because this screen, the main screen, has a view controller, which is the file we have called the view controller, but we need another view controller for this screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click the folder and click new file, and we're going to make it a CocoaTouch class, and we can just call it add note view controller, and it's a subclass of, if you just search right there, UI view controller, and make it language Swift, and that's fine. And you can add it and make sure your target is your notes app. So once that's done, we've got an add note view controller. We're going to go to our storyboard, and what you do is you just click on the top bar of your second screen, and in the identity button, click that, and your class is going to be add note view controller. So now we're able to interact with this screen using our new file, which is add note view controller. And if you want to make sure it works, just print so once we restart our app, it should say controller connected when we go to that screen. So I see my data here, I click add note, and it says controller connected, which means this view controller is connected. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to add IB outlets from our main storyboard to the view controller. So we need IB outlets for the text box, the text field, and the save button and delete button. So let's import the text field and make sure it's an outlet, and you can just name it title text field, like that. And you can import the text box, just option drag it as well. Make sure it's an outlet, and you can call it note or body text view. And let's also import the save button and let's just call it save button. Like that. And now we also want to add a function, so drag the save button to your screen again, but change it from an outlet to an action. And you can just call this save click. And if you want to make sure this works, you're going to say print saved. So once I restart my app and click the button, it should say saved. I go here and I click save, and you see save down here, so I know my button's connected. Now what we want to do is actually use the function we created over here, add note, and we want to pass in this data as the actual data. So I'm going to go to my add note view controller, and I am going to, so when we click the save button, what I want to do is API functions dot add note. And what's the data we want to add? Well, I want to add for the date, I'll just put a string right now, I'll just call it placeholder, because we actually have to do a bit more work to get the actual date out, but we can set up these two, the title and the note. Well, the title is just title text field dot text, or the note is just body text view dot text. And you can make these optionals. Actually, it's going to tell us right here, so you can either make it optional or force unwrap. Let's just force unwrap it for now. Okay, now we're going to restart our app, and we're going to click add note. So now let's clear this out and say this is the first note from the iPhone. And in the title we can say this is the iPhone's note. Now we click save. So now we don't have any feedback, but if we go back here and refresh our actual fetch route, it should show a new note. And it does right here. It says this is the first note from the iPhone, this is the iPhone's note. And also, if I restart my app, I should also see my new data there. So I restart the app and we see this is the iPhone's note here. So now we have to add some feedback so we know if the note has saved or not, because I can enter a new note and save it, but I don't know if it's been saved or not, but it's working in the background, we can see right here. So we'll start working on that. We also need to implement the delete button, and we also need to be able to edit a note as well. Alright, so now that we've added the feature to add a note and fetch all notes from the database, I want to add the feature to update a note. So when I open my app and I click on a note, I want it to go into this add note screen, but instead of having a blank screen or this data here that we're going to remove eventually, I actually want it to have the note itself. So for example, if I write this is the iPhone's note and I click on it, I want it to go into this screen, and the title should already say this is the iPhone's note, and this body should be whatever I set in my database. So then I can just edit it maybe, so this is iPhone's note updated, and save that, and it should update the note. So the first thing we're going to do to do that is I'm going to go to my prototype cell, and I'm going to option drag it into the next view controller, just like that. And I was going to say selection segue, and I'm going to choose show, and it will actually give you two lines now. So the first line is the segue from the add note button to the next screen, and now we've also added a segue when we click an actual table view cell, it'll also go to the add note screen. So for example, if I rebuild my app now, now I can click any of the notes and it goes into the screen. So the next part is I have to pass this data. So for example, the title and the actual note, I have to pass it to this screen and pre-populate the text fields with that data. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into my add note view controller, and I'm going to declare a variable called note. So I can just say var note var note colon note question mark. So that means I've declared a note object and it can be null. So I don't have to give it instantly. I only have to pass the object when I actually click on a note in the table view. So I'm going to go to my view controller and I have to pass whatever note the user clicked to the actual view controller. So the way I'm going to do that is using a segue to pass the data. So I'm going to write override func and I'm going to prepare. And you see the first one, prepare for segue UI storyboard segue. Just click that. So I'm going to write let vc equals storyboard dot destination, or sorry, segue dot destination as, and then I'm going to give it the name of the view controller I'm going to. So the view controller we're going to when we actually click something. So for example, I'm on the main screen, which is the view controller called view controller, and I click something and I go into this view controller, which is called add note view controller. So then I'm going to say as add note view controller. Now I'm going to give it an if statement. I'm going to say if segue dot identifier equals something. I want to pass some data. So what is the identifier? Well, if I go back to my main.storyboard, if I click on the second segue, so the segue from the table view to the add note screen, if I click on that, I see it has an identifier property. So let me set this identifier to update note segue, because that's what it is. So it's the segue to update a note. So now since I've defined it as update note segue, I can actually reference it in my view controller. So if I write segue.identifier is equal to update note segue, what I want to do is I want to write vc.note. So, and remember, .note is the note property we defined in our view controller. Our add note view controller, we gave it the property of note, so that's what we're accessing. And that is going to be equal to notes array to the notes table view dot for selected index path for selected row dot row, just like that. And now it gives me a force unwrap, so we can just force unwrap it. And now it works. So what that does is that if the identifier of the segue is update note segue, so that means only if I'm clicking from a table view cell to the note add note view controller, so that removes the other segue, which is from the add note button to this add note view controller. So I'm only specifying when you click. So I'm only specifying when you click from the table view, and I'm not specifying when you click from the add note, because when I click the add note button, I want to have this empty. I don't want to have any pre-populated data. But when I click from the table view, I want it to say the data it already has, right? So for example, when I click update, I want the title here to be update. So that's what this line does. If segue.identifier is equal to update note segues. So that's what if segue.identifier does. It just specifies that I'm clicking the main table view and I'm not clicking the add note button. And then I'm giving the next view controller, add note view controller, I'm passing our actual notes object. So notes array is the array of notes we have. And notes table view dot index path for selected row dot row basically is the index I click. So for example, when I click the first one, it's going to pass in 0. So that just means notes array to the 0. So I want the first item in my notes array. When I click the third one, notes table view dot index for selected path row. So it gives me the third item in my notes array. That's all it does. So now if I go to my add note view controller, if in the view did load, I can just say print note like that. Or we can even do print node.title. So now if I restart my app and I click on note, it should give me the node title in the actual debug console down here. So when I click update, I see it says optional update. So if I change that from optional to a required and rebuild my app, I see when I click, for example, this is the iPhone's note, it prints out this is the iPhone's note. So now what we're gonna do is we can say text field or title text field dot text is equal to note dot title. And we can also say body text view dot text is equal to note dot note. And let's make these required. So now if I restart my app and I click, for example, update, now it says updated and it has my note body. For example, when I click this is the iPhone's note, it says this is the iPhone's note and it has the note body here. So now I can edit it and I can save it. But when I save it and I restart my app, it doesn't save to the same note. So if I restart my app, you see that it didn't save to the same note, it actually created a new note. So if I write this is the iPhone's note update and save that and restart the app, it says it adds a new entry instead of using the same entry. And the reason that happens is because we're still making the save button add a new note. So you see on the save click it says add note. Well, when I click a note and I update it, I want to use my update route we defined in the server. So if we go back to our server, we defined this update route and I want to use this, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to go into Xcode and go to our API functions file, and we're actually going to create a new route to update. So I write func update note, and it'll take in the same things. It takes in a date, which is a string. It takes in a title, which is a string. It takes in a note, which is a string, but it also now takes in an ID, which is a string. Because remember, we have to specify the ID of the item we want to update, and then we can update it. So now I go into Xcode, and around that I'm going to write af.request, and I'm going to give it the URL. I can just copy the previous URL and change it from create to update. And the method will still be .post because it's still a post route. And the encoding will also be the same. And we can also copy the headers, but we also have to add one more header, and we'll do that right now. So we copy the headers, but we also add the underscore ID header. So underscore ID, or not the underscore ID, you can just call it ID, and we'll define that as ID. And the reason we write ID is because our server is expecting something called ID. So what that means is the title of our updated note will be the title we pass in. The date will be the date we pass in, and the note will be the updated note we pass in. And we're also going to pass in the ID of the note we're updating. And now what we can do is write response.response.json. And with two curly brackets, we can just say print response. Or we don't even need a print statement. We can just say .response.json. And the reason it's giving me an error is because I haven't written response in. And then I can write print response like that. So I'll know if I failed or not. And for the add note as well, we should also add print response so we know if it fails or not. So now that I've got my update note route working, or my function working, I want to go into my add note view controller. And right now, I'll change this and I'll actually write API functions dot functions dot update note. And the date will be, let's just hard code a date right now. Let's call it placeholder. The title will be, and we can just copy what we had for the previous route, which was adding a note, but we also have to specify the ID. So the ID will be note.id. And now that route works. So now if I restart my app, I see everything here. So for example, I click on title and I change this from title to updated title. And when I click save, it shouldn't add a new note, but it should modify the note I had previously. So I click save and I restart my app and I see updated title now. So it clearly worked. So I'll try one more time. New item. I can write new item updated and I click save, and it's not going to add a new item to my array, but it's just going to update that old item I previously had. So I restart my app and you can see new item updated. So that works. So now I know that it works and I can update a note, but now when I click add note, my app crashes. And the reason it crashes is because, for example, at the very beginning, remember when we specified the title's text field to be the note's title and the body to be the note's body, which allowed us, for example, when I click updated title and I rebuild my app because it crashed. So for example, when I click updated title, it pre-populates this field with the title. When I click add note, I'm not sending any data of the note I want to pre-populate, because when I go into my view controller, I only sent the data of the note when it was update note segue. But when I click the actual add note button, that's not the same segue. So this data isn't being sent to our add note view controller, but we're trying to make our text field something that's nil, which is why it crashes. So what I can do now is create another variable called update, and I'll set that by default to false, like that. So now what's going to happen is when I go into my view controller, I'll write vc.update is equal to true. Alright, so now I'll go back into my add note view controller, and on view did load, I'll say if update equal true, then I only want to pre-populate it. Otherwise, I want to leave it blank. And same for the save click. So right now, how do we know which one I want to do? So how do I know if I want to save a note or if I want to update a note? Well, in my save click, I can also say if update equal true, I want to update my note. So I'll put my update route or my update function inside the if statement, and otherwise I'll put it in the else, and otherwise, so if I'm not updating, I'm adding a note, like that. So now if I refresh my app, I'll see that if I click update, it works, it pre-populates the field. But if I click add note, it also works, and it doesn't pre-populate the field, but it gives me an empty field. And also we can just remove this block of text by going to our main storyboard and clicking on our text field, and we can just make this empty, like that. And also in our text field on the top, we can set some placeholders, so we can say enter a title, like that. So now if I refresh my app, I'll see that if I click any of these notes, I'll get the note here. And if I click add note, I'm going to get a blank field. So I can say another note, and I'll type in this is another note, and I'll save that. So now if I restart my app, I'll see I got this is another note, and it says this is another note. Now I can write this is another note updated. And when I save that and restart my app, this time it'll update that note, and we got this is another note updated. So now that's working. Let's do a few more small fixes. The first thing is, when I click my save button, I want it to go back to this screen. So right now when I click save, nothing happens. So to go back to the main screen, when I click the save button, in the save button, I'm going to write self.navigationcontroller.pop viewController animated true. So what that'll do is when I click the save button, it'll go from this screen back to this screen. So let's run our app again. And I click save and it goes back to that original screen. So I'll click save and it goes back to the original screen. I add a new note. Alright, new note, and I'll click save and it should go back to the main screen, and it does. And the next thing is, when I go back to the main screen, I want it to update my notes. So right now I have to restart the app every time to see my new notes. So the way I'm going to do that is by going into my view controller. And right now we update the array in the view did load. But there's another function called view will appear. Override func view will appear. So view did load only gets called when the app restarts for the first time. So that's why to update a note I have to restart my app. But view will appear is called every time the view will appear. So I click a new note, I click save, and the view is going to appear, and that's when it updates this. So in this, I'll write the exact same functions. I can just copy paste it. So I'll just copy it and paste it in here. So API functions.delegate, we don't need that. But what we do need is API functions.fetch notes. And the fetch notes, remember when we made a protocol, it'll update our array and it'll refresh the table view. So now if I restart my app, I can see that if I write update new and I click save, now it updates automatically without having to restart my app. And also I can also add it in my view will did appear. So if I write override func view did appear, I can also copy this exact same code and just paste it here. So now both it gets updated when the view will appear, and when the view actually appears, it gets updated the last time, just to make sure everything works properly. So now we'll restart our app, and you'll see if I write, this is the 9th note, and I click save, it'll show this is the 9th note. And I can say this is the 9th note updated, and I click save, and it'll say this is the 9th note updated. So I don't have to restart my app anymore. So that's pretty much it. So we've got now, we can add a note, we can update a note, and we fetch all the notes. The last thing our server could handle was deleting a note. So now let's get started on the next part, which is being able to click the delete button. So if I go to my simulator, I click the delete button, it should delete my note. So when I click on any of these nodes and I click the delete button, I want it to delete the note. But when I click the add note, I don't want to see the delete button because you can't delete something you haven't added. So firstly, let's deal with that part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in my add note view controller right here. And firstly, I'm going to import the delete button so we can work with it. Let's go into our main storyboard on one side and my view control on the other. And I'll just option drag the button into the actual file. And I'll just call this delete button. And I'll also add a function. So I'll change this from an outlet to an action. And I'll call this delete click. And just to make sure my delete works, I'll write print deleted. So when I restart my app, I should see print deleted, or I should see deleted when I click the button. So I click the button and I see deleted, so I know it's connected. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is make sure that when I click the add note button, I don't see the delete button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a view will appear, just like how we did in the previous view controller. So I'll write override func view will appear. And in here I'm going to say if update is equal to false. So that means if we're not updating something, which means we're adding something, I want to self.delete button is enabled is equal to false, and self.delete button title is equal to empty. So the first part makes it that the button is not clickable, and the second part makes it that the keyword delete is gone, so it's just going to be an empty button. So if I restart my app now, I'll see that when I click add note, I don't see anything up here. But when I click any one of the notes, I can actually see the delete button. So that's working now. So the next thing I want to do is actually make the delete button work. So the delete button is super easy to use, just like how we made one of these functions where it sends the ID and it sends the note and the date and the title. For the delete button, we just need to send an ID. So what we can really do is just copy this whole function. So I'll just copy this whole function and I'll paste it down here. And I'll call this delete note. But we don't have to specify a date, a title, or a note. We just have to specify the ID. Because if you go back into our server, when we're deleting something, all it takes in is an ID, and it just deletes that ID. So I'll just specify one ID, and I'll remove everything else, just like that. So now everything else is the same. It's going to say af.request. It's going to have your URL, and you're going to change it from update or whatever you copied it to delete. The method is still .post, and the encoding is the exact same. And the header is only one, which is ID, and that's the ID. And now what we can do is we can go into our add note view controller, and we can say API functions.delete note, and it takes in one ID, and the ID will be note.id, just like that. And we can actually make this force unwrap because we know we're not going to get a nil, because when I go back to my simulator, I've removed the functionality of the delete button when we're adding a note. So the only time the user sees the delete button is when we have a note. So when I click delete, I'm always going to pass in a note ID, and it's never going to be nil, and that's why I can force unwrap it. So now let's restart this and see what happens. So when I click add note, I don't see anything here. That's good. Let's say I want to delete this is 9th note updated. So I click delete. I don't see anything happened here, but if I go back, I see it's been deleted. So the reason I don't see anything happen in this screen is because we forgot to pop the view controller. So just like how we did in the save click where we had self.navigation.pop view controller, we'll copy that and we'll paste it in the delete button. So now let's restart our app. And if I click any one of these and I delete it, it'll go back and it deleted the note. So I can delete all the notes I want, just like that. So far we've got the functionalities for adding a note. So let me clear everything out. Alright, so I can add a note. I'll say this is the first note. And you can add a body, so this, the first note. And I can save it, and it saves my note here. And obviously if I restart my app, it's saved in a database, so it's always going to be here. So this is the first note. I can also update the note, so I can write this is the first note that I updated. And we'll see that I updated the note. I can also delete the note and I won't see anything here.
The Notes app is nearly done. In the next lesson, you're going to do some code organization and some styling. Now I have a question for you. What do you think about full stack iOS development? Is it better to have a hosted backend like Firebase or to do it yourself like we've done in this app series? Let me know what you think by leaving a quick comment below. And on your way down there, please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it and subscribe so you don't miss the next lesson. And lastly, if you want to see more app series like this and courses on other iOS topics, be sure to check out CWC+. I'll leave a link to it on the end screen and in the description below. All right, I'll see you in the next lesson.